Welcome to a wired-in quick chat from the initiative in Computational Humanities, Arts and Social Sciences through the Faculty of Computing and Data Sciences at Boston University. Today we're going to hear from James Grady, who is Assistant Professor of Graphic Design at Boston University and the BU Spark Creative Director. He is also Principal of Design Axle, a graphic design consultancy with clients spanning the globe. He received his Master of Fine Arts in Graphic Design from the Rhode Island School of Design with honours and his Bachelor of Arts from the University of Massachusetts, Dartmouth College of Visual and Performing Arts in Digital Media. James worked with students in BU Spark over several semesters to create the theatre software Random Actor. He also co-authored a grant from Boston University's Digital Learning and Innovation Initiative to bring an artist in residence to engage with students in creative research at Boston University's School of Visual Arts, School of Theatre, and Faculty of Computing and Data Science. Please join me in welcoming James Grady.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks for having me. I really appreciate this. Really excited to talk about this work that I've been doing with Clay Hopper over the past few years. It's been really fantastic and has really helped push my own research as a graphic designer who's really interested in multidisciplinary work across many different industries and different professions. And in particular, this is probably the most exciting work I've done in my career, working with Clay and working in this space. So today I want to talk about data science through the lens of art, design, and curiosity. So that's me. I'm James Grady, as introduced, Assistant Professor of Art and Graphic Designs. Graphic design, I think, can be sort of pigeonholed into certain types of outputs, but I believe graphic design really traverses all different types of media and industry. So I want to talk about a story when I was in grad school at RISD. We used to do these posters every year for the class. And my second year in grad school, the day before classes started, I had this dream. And I saw this poster of all my students on the wall, but they were moving. They were alive. They were like blinking, and they were just like, they were silent, but they were just like totally alive. And I was just like, I woke up thinking it was so real. I was talking with my classmates at the time. And I remember saying that like the first day we had like a little cookout, I said, I had this dream, I think, or it was real. I said, but we had this poster that was alive. Did we talk about this, or was it a dream? And they said it was totally a dream, but it sounds awesome and we should try to make it happen. So I had very limited, I guess, like I could do a certain amount of coding. I could do a certain amount of things with technology, but there was e-ink was a thing at the time, and I was like, oh, maybe I can make this electronic ink black and white poster that's moving. But you know, everything sort of like within graphic design, I think there's like a practical nature. When you're in school, there's a time frame. So like, what can I do with the tools that I have? So the first thing I thought of was, okay, I'll set up essentially an algorithm of photographs. I'll take photos of every single one in my cohort, and I'll just have them go through a simple system. They sit on a bench, and they'll do eyes closed, eyes open, eyes closed, eyes open, 4 shots, click it away on a tripod, and set everything to black and white. And so this is a sampling of some of the students in the class. I wound up creating this poster, that I thought was interesting. It's a visualization of everyone. It has motion. It has texture to it. There's an XY grid, and all the names are at the bottom so you can see it. So I think it was interesting for what it was, but it didn't satisfy what I wanted, that blinking wall of faces. So the next step I took was to build a really simple website. So I used the grid of all the faces, and they were essentially just GIF animations that when you hovered over the face, they blinked. And so that was fun. It was kind of clever, but it really, again, wasn't what I wanted. So after more exploration, I was turned on to computer vision and turned on to some software that I could manipulate the camera on my web camera to interact with with kind of anything. I mean, it can be, a video is computer vision. So computer vision is used all the time in Instagram and on social media and TikTok and any filters that you use. But I was really like, it was magical. Like you move your hand and you can change it to graphics. You know, it's not that simple at the time, but it was really great. So I said, okay, through kind of a long time of iterations, I came up with a really simple schematic where the number one in the center here is a camera, a simple web camera on the ceiling. Number two is a projector, just like we're using on the wall here. And then those sort of like spaceship shapes are just people walking into the zone. And then the projection would be on the wall. So as people walked into the space, that computer vision would track their movement and then trigger those loops, those animations that were happening. So it was, you know, again, it was just like setting all these things up, figuring it out, tinkering with it, figuring out how to use a long USB camera. So there was a lot of technical things. But I felt like I was just sort of like a kid sort of building a project, like building a tree fort. I know I can figure it out with these simple things. So it was just one step at a time. So this wound up being a project that I created. So this was in the lobby of the studio space in Rhode Island. And this is literally just masking tape on the floor, creating a zone. All of these little badges across the bottom are all the students' names. And then, so when someone would walk into that space, it would essentially wake up the wall. So I'll play a really short video so you can see what this project looks like. So one of the things that I thought was really exciting in terms of narrative context, that people were trying to figure out the technology, but they could really see if no one was walking in that space, all the eyes would close. So it was really like the wall was asleep. And you'd have to walk through this lobby, you know, every day to go to the door. And as you walk through the space, the wall would wake up. And I thought that was like this sort of amazing moment of like feeling design in a different scale, this immersive design, and also having, instead of it just being a gimmick, like having real interaction with this idea of design in sort of the fourth dimension. So I'll show one other project that I did with the same technology that I was really excited about. This is in the South End in Boston. There was this really beautiful radio and TV repair shop down the street from me where I lived. And I was fascinated by it. So I wanted to interview the person that owned it. It was open for like 75 years. They had a banner. But the garage door was closed like so many times, and I couldn't get in there. It turns out they were closed, not a big surprise. But I loved the typography, and I thought, okay, if I can't get in there to figure out what the technology is or interview this person, how can I monumentalize this building? And the closer I looked at the screen itself, it looked like a 16:9, you know, just like we're looking at here on the screen. And it also, these lines sort of look like an old CRT if you ever, you know, shot with a video camera. Those lines look like a screen itself. So I thought this would be really great to sort of bring that same technology into a different space. Again, if you walk in front of it, there's a web camera that tracks your space, and then that bus stop marquee would project onto the wall. So I'll play the clip of this project. So the idea with this really simple filter, essentially, through computer vision is to bring this sort of new technology with this old technology, this reflection onto the space, and breathe life again into this building that was not long after torn down and made into really expensive condos. So with that, all of this wouldn't have become possible if not for my curiosity with technology and the help of processing. So processing is an open source language that originally was built on top of Java, and now there's P5.js, which is JavaScript. It's an open source community created by Casey Reese and Ben Fry. When I saw Ben Fry's work in particular, when I first started, I was blown away. Coming from sort of like the late 90s and digital media, thinking about the things that were happening at the Media Lab and following John Maeda's work, it was sort of like a natural progression into this. And so this tool is open source, and it's also created really for, I'll just read through this. Processing is a flexible software sketchbook and language for learning how to code. Since 2001, processing has promoted software literacy with the visual arts and visual literacy within technology. There are tens of thousands of students, artists, designers, and research and hobbyists who use processing for learning and prototyping. So it's an entry point that really sort of tries to democratize coding, and it's really slanted towards visual design, which is my sort of point of view. Now, this is sort of built on the shoulders of John Maeda's work at the Media Lab. So Casey and Ben were students of John Maeda's at the Media Lab. He built Design by Numbers. Originally was done in Java. But again, really simple code that gives you a visual representation right away. So it takes away like a huge amount of setup that you don't see anything to put something visual on the screen right away. Now, if you grew up in the 70s or 80s, when I was a kid in elementary school, and this was at like a parochial school in Warwick, Rhode Island, I remember using Logo, and you could essentially make this turtle move around the screen by typing in like 4 lines of code. And I remember that, like, this is amazing. So there's like this history that I can't get away from with computer-generated design and in learning about new technologies. So Ben Fry started Fathom Information Design, still does the day-to-day on processing with Casey. So I worked at Fathom Information Design. I interned there when I was in graduate school. And then Ben and I went on to teach at MIT for 3 semesters information design with processing. It was a great experience, and I did that. That was like right before I came to BU. There's a great article on the AIGA, or the American Institute of Graphic Arts, which is, again, a traditional graphic design sort of blog, although they do a really great job of looking at different mediums, that talks about processing, the history of processing. It's a 2-part post, and there's a lot of great quotes, but I like this one that says, "I really want to be part of a space where you could start writing code and you didn't feel like you were immediately going to do something wrong." And I think that's the pressure that comes with technology, and especially with code. And I actually think it's gotten worse. Even though there's more democratization of code, I still, like, my students in general are just like, I don't even know where to start. So I really try to give entry points for my students. And although they're using technology all the time, they're not necessarily like lifting the hood and trying to figure out how it's created. There are things like open processing, and the same with the processing website itself, which will give you the code to get started with these things. So these are just some samples I did last night, just really quickly looking at computer vision techniques. So this is just me in black and white. I won't get too far into the details, but this is sort of a threshold mapping. So if you can imagine that grid of faces that I had, if it hit the black threshold versus the white threshold, it would trigger that loop. So it acts basically as like a mouse on the screen. So the mouse is very precise, but this allows you to be sort of like have 1,000 pixels as your mice interacting with each one of the loops. And then quickly you can move into iterating through dots and shapes and smoke and colors and all of these things. There are other tools out there that give you free entry points that are also visual code editors. So like Unity is a great tool to use if you don't want, if again, you're still intimidated by looking at a paragraph of code or long lists of code. This is more of a drag and drop. There's still complexity to this, but I think it's just like trying to find accessibility for different types of learners and how they're gonna experience some of these things if they are excited. This is one of our initial sketches for Random Actor with Seyun, who is an undergrad graphic design student. And we were working with some folks from Spark in Unity to build this out. We built like probably 3 or 4 prototypes on this in different languages. And then we got sort of led into open frameworks. So open frameworks, like processing, is an open source community. It was created by Zach Lieberman and Theo Watson and Arturo Casto. I met Theo while working at Fathom and some of different conferences. So this is C++, or the code that gets your iOS projects up and running. And this is an example of Theo's studio, who does a lot of this stuff. It's really amazing. He was incredibly helpful to Clay and I when we were coming up with this, and introduced us to Paulo. So Paulo came and did sort of 3 events with us in the spring 2022. And one was a workshop with my graphic design students. So in the spring, I teach first year, second semester MFA graphic design students. Most of them have never experienced anything like this or touched any code. And he gave this really amazing lecture, sort of like demystifying what computer vision is, how you can make immersive experiences, and what you can do with them. Paulo also did some hands-on work. So we set up just a simple projector, and we had a Microsoft Kinect to do some depth tracking with a tool that he had created. So there was no coding, that first day. They just experienced it. These really simple visualizations. If you do a couple things in code, you realize how easy that is to understand what frames per second are. And if you take away the background, then you see everything that's moving through space, because frames per second are essentially erasing over each one. And one move in code gives you this like amazing experience, and they were all blown away by that. I think because of its simplicity, it's like drawing in space. And then we also did some code workshops where we introduced them to processing, and we had them just start manipulating some code, and they were so excited about this.
So from here,
here's Paulo. I don't have the audio taken out of it, but I'll just let him talk through. It's only like 20 seconds. So Paulo was really wonderful working with the students. I don't know if you can hear this, but he talks about it's like going into a swimming pool, or it's like pushing water. And one of the students says, "Oh yeah, it's like a belly flop with the form that you're creating." And so we worked through all these exercises where they brought their own imagery to it. There was voice commands controlling things. And what I really love to see is that students brought that language into printed material or books or other experiences that don't just need to be that projection, computer vision tracking. Reshma and Arjun and Chen all worked with Clay on Exit the King. Reshma worked really closely with Paulo to work in real time, and again, very little code experience, was able to work with Paulo in real time to manipulate the visualizations. Arjun and Chen also worked with just the graphics in general, the motion graphics, and also some of advising on what the visual language would look like in the play. So I'm really proud of that experience that Clay and I have had with our students, and seeing them grow and trying to demystify these things so that they can build on this. And if they want to do some really talented students I have in the room here that want to build more on these things and have experience with code, can push these things even further, learn from visual designers, and the visual designers can learn from the developers. So I'll wrap up with this. This is a thing I tell my students a lot. It's really all about story and audience, and it's all about craft. The last thing that Clay and I ever want is something to feel like a gimmick or like you see the trick. We really want something that's immersive, truly immersive. truly immersive in narrative and beautiful in craft. There's digital craft, and I think that there's some things are easy to do with code, but I don't think you can, it's not easy to bring art and it's not easy to bring narrative into code. So I tell them to be curious about content and form, to be fearless about that technology and the tools, to be multimodal, to think about digital and print, analog, immersive experience, and be collaborators, be empathetic, and also be critical, and be prolific. So be experimental, but also be practical, because you got to plug that USB cord in. How are you going to get up there? You need a ladder, and is this whole thing going to fall down? At the end of the day, you know, I think you can imagine how these things happen. So thank you very much. All the links that I have are on this QR code if anyone wants to take an image, or I'll share this information out with you later, but happy to take any questions. Any questions? Yeah.
What are the other forms of media do you think this could be influenced by or to like what other applications do besides like just using it as like the bus in that old building? Because I'm like thinking of a bunch of different ways you can use like different mazes or interact with museums.
Yeah. Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Like wayfinding, mazes. I also think that Clay and I have been talking to folks about, you know, what is the power resource that takes some of these things, and how can we limit that? Can we use like low-powered LED lights? Can we make interactive things that are more low resolution? How can we interact with things again that are maybe physical, that aren't always just screen-based, but can you make sort of like physical things move? How can you create environments that are architectural but not always just like light on a screen, but you know, maybe more dimensional or different sort of outputs of things like that. Yeah, make it more efficient, but I think also just interesting in a different way. So I think it's like constantly trying to think of ways to push the experience. So we're always kind of like, it's a little bit of a magic show, right? We're always trying to like make this thing that's immersive and experiential, but we also don't want people to necessarily even worry about the technology. We just want them to experience it. But we've also talked about, you know, other things for, you know, folks that have neurodiversity or physical issues. I think, you know, how do you interact with space, and like how can you make, if you're nonverbal, can you use gesture to help you talk? There's a lot of eye tracking things. Like a lot of these things have been developed, but how can this technology again be democratized to like families? How can we put this in the tool so it doesn't have to be used in a university setting or a hospital setting or something like that? Can we build tools that work that way?
Yeah, no, I definitely think it could be another way to use language, especially because we've seen it, I think even in sci-fi movies, like aliens using language in different ways that we can't comprehend. So interacting with the environment, I think that could be a really interesting way to show emotions or really complex concepts that in language kind of feels constricted by.
Yeah.
Right? I don't know if that makes sense.
Yeah, no, I think it's empathy and like understanding like physical gesture and like body language and all these things that I think you can't get necessarily if it's a reflection or if it's through a screen. I think there are ways to sort of dive into that. That would be really interesting.
I think this whole medium is really interesting to me. So I think I'm just thinking of like a bunch of different ways, and especially like the non-verbal aspect. I think that's a really interesting way for someone to communicate. Because right now I think it's really limited with that. It's more so like you touch a picture,
Mm-hmm.
imagine that you could interact with that picture and maybe do a certain thing.
Right. Yeah, for sure.
James, thank you for this. One of the design tasks, I take it, is to figure out what the visual representation of whatever movement you're talking about is going to be. Someone's making a set of decisions about how much things can vary,
Mm-hmm.
the sorts of visual expressions you'll have, and the responsiveness to motion or whatever other things, sound. It could
Mm-hmm.
be someone's making all of those decisions.
Sure.
Which I assume is a kind of a choke point in this, because there's infinitely many things you could do.
Yeah.
So I suppose it's possible to imagine 10 other things you wish you could do every time the system's actually operating and doing one thing.
Yeah.
So how are you managing that invitation to infinity? Like, how do you decide what to focus on? Is it just the sort of designer's judgment call? This is what we're going to do for this thing? Or do you have to negotiate with 10 other people and they want to tweak it and make you make a different decision? I mean, how does that work?
Yeah, I think Clay and I work really well in that fashion to collaborate. I think we think alike when it comes to sort of visual output. So that seems like just a conversation that's seamless with us. But I think we do need to figure out restraints to put on. We do this all the time with my design students. Is like give them restraints that they have to work within in order to create what their output is and how far can they push that. So some of the examples I showed with Paulo in the workshop, we started with like the mirror. When it's the mirror, that's the video of you. What you think is yourself and in real time is really just a representation of you at 60 frames per second or 30 frames per second. Or what happens, when we make you just into a form. And then what happens when we take that background away and then we start moving and then you become this sort of like living drawing. So I think we just need to be incremental with that. And it's the blank canvas problem because it's like, what are you gonna create? So we tried to build restraints. And I think in any of the proposals that Clay and I have worked on, we really try to outline clearly. And I think that's like the practical thing that you have to say, okay, certainly, we could do anything. I believe that in most any case. I mean, look at this building. I'm always like, this is just such an amazing feat of like human, imagination. But you have to like figure out like what is the starting point? And I think the example that I showed at the beginning of like having the fever dream of like this thing moving, what are those steps that you have to take? What is the thing that you know how to do? Like as simple as taking a picture to making a simple website to developing it more. I think that's the artist process that's really important. And then, how can you replicate that? How can you scale it? So that's like more of like the business side of things that Clay and I probably don't like to talk about, but are always there. I mean, we joke about that, but we are thinking about scaling. This isn't us just doing this stuff in our basement. Like we want to share with an audience, and you have to be like really sophisticated and precise and pragmatic.
It's interesting you should ask that question because the people at OTD are consistently pushing me to restrict what it is that this thing is for. They really want a very specific application that has a market product fit. And what that does is it's a constraint that goes a little bit too far because it's all about the possibilities that are inherent in this thing, So I think trying to shoehorn it into a set of categories of like, what it's for can be problematic. But I agree with James, as a designer, as an artist, you have to be a ruthless self-editor. There comes a point where you just have to say, okay, we're going to ignore all of these possibilities so that we can collapse them down to this finite set.
Yeah. But that's the genius of the creative too, isn't it? It's committing to something and being specific. I also wanted to ask you about OpenAI's options.
Mm-hmm.
If you're going to get even more generative, it's natural to go to something like Point E
Mm-hmm.
or one of these other tools that naturally takes words and produces images
Mm-hmm.
and does it spontaneously. And if you could do it fast enough, you might be able to do it live,
Mm-hmm.
so that the script itself, with random seeds, is generating imagery.
Mm-hmm.
This has got to be something you're thinking about.
I think it goes to technology that isn't that new. That's like that, like procedural coding. So how do you generate these things on the fly? So how do you make an environment? And these are things that like really sophisticated, 3D movies like The Lion King or something. Like it looks like you're in the Sahara. It's amazing, but that stuff isn't being drawn blade by blade. It's an algorithm that's creating that seed, and then it develops out all these other things, and then you have control of it. I'm excited for those opportunities, but I need to sort of like get with it, and I get like understand it a little bit more, and then not completely understand it. All the examples of coding languages that I shared, like certainly don't know, 1% of that stuff, but I know enough to like make art with it. The same with like the medium of painting or anything that I've ever tried. Like, I don't really understand how it all works, but I know enough to like play with it and then make something new. And I think that's what AI is. I don't think it's, I hate to even say it, it's like a replacement. That's people say that, and I think it's like crazy, because every tool, supports, certainly as an artist, I don't think Clay and I will be replaced, because I think we'll always adapt to something interesting and be excited about it. It's that curiosity. Yeah.
I'm just wondering, I guess one question I have is how you make all your art, obvious to the user, like how they would interact with it, like immediately obvious to them. Because like for my project and the blob we're making, I'm just wondering how the user's gonna know how to interact with it. And all of your examples, it was very like clear, like there's an outline of a human, like they can see that it's them. I'm just wondering about the steps you take.
Yeah, I think that's a tricky thing. So working, before getting into like the computer vision stuff, like working at Fathom and doing data visualization, so representing complex data graphics on a website usually, or on a mobile phone, like people are really apprehensive to touch anything. It's like being at a museum, like they don't exactly know where to go. So you have to like find the balance between like being overly explicit, like tap here. But with the computer vision stuff, I guess I got lucky with the Blink project, where you had to walk through it, and then you would just catch out of the corner of your eye that was moving. So you have to find like little cues like that when you're on a public space, like in the South End, and you're walking by, like what's going on here? Like those things are pretty obvious. But I think with like if you're making like amorphous blob, that's just moving, is that just a loop, an animation, or how can you get it to follow you, or how can you get it to trigger you, so that it is alive, and it's sort of you're looking at it and it's looking at you. But I think you can do that with color. I think you can do it with when you get closer to it, what happens to it. You can do it with typography too, but like what does it say to you? Like what do you see it reading out? But I think it's important to like have that, understand the empathy of what it's doing, and then you can dig in more. So once you trust the blob, and then it's moving and you're talking to it and it's giving you a response, and it says like touch here for more information, or like how do you get it to sort of respond in a natural way? But again, I would just try to keep it really, really simple. Yeah.
With the Blink project, you say you got lucky because people had to walk through it, and was it instantly that they would recognize that they were interacting with this, or it was interacting with them? Was it right away?
From the sort of experience that I had with it, so it was a projector that was higher up on the wall. You're in an art space, so I think people would be looking at it anyway, so they see all these faces. And you saw this like marker on the floor, like the space, and then it was pretty instant, even though it was silent, that you could see this like flickering of faces.
When you were creating it, were you taking into account that process of discovery for the observer?
No. I was just like doing this all the time in front of my computer. And I was just like, oh my God, this is so cool. I said, but you know what I want this to do is like when I move away from it, I want everyone's eyes to close. Like that was the thing I wanted it to do. And so it just went back to zero. And then, it was just doing the same thing over and over. But because of like your orientation, and I think also the relationship with the students, so you knew someone, and it was just, there was like humor to it. And it was also like, so no, that was something that like being in the theater, you don't know until you get out there, and then you sort of modify. But the biggest issue I had with that project in particular was I was always imagining you would be looking at it and like waving to it, but then the restraints were like where the projector was and the height of it. So that's what made me orient it from the top down. So that was something that changed on site. Yeah. Yeah, it was all based on the web camera. So it was just a web camera, USB, that went to a little computer that was just sitting up on top of the projector. But everyone was like jumping up and down on it, thinking it was like sensor based. And I thought that was fun.
It seemed to have that paradigm of an on-off always.
Yeah, yeah.
I think that's so exciting about this technology is that it can be situational, for a public space versus a private space. But we're going to approach it with some form of familiarity to start to make the connections. So
I guess that was kind of like what I was thinking too, because they were able to notice because it's something predictable. Like if you move in front of it, you expect to see some sort of shadow. It's something that we're used to seeing.
Mhm.
So in that sense, it is easier for people to use instead of something that's more free form. You won't actually like maybe not expect the outcome you're seeing. So I guess it's kind of like two different types of simulations where you have like unexpected output or something surprising or new that you couldn't really think of before.
I think of it as like a poster. I talk to my sort of like entry level graphic design students when we're doing just like printed things. Like from across the room, it needs to be like really awe-inspiring, and you need to want to like know what that thing is. And then when you get halfway there, then you can read the title. You understand sort of like what the overall content is, and then you get really close and you get the details. And I think the same thing happens with an interactive. If it's on a screen on your laptop or on your phone. You want to like see something that's cool that catches your eye, and then like get more context, and then start interacting with it, whether it's in space or actually touching it or talking to it. So I think just that level of threes is really important.